Before breaking up in 2023, Dawn Raid were one of the most prominent radical anarchist black metal bands. The video for their song, Go As Free Companions, features the band performing in what looks like an abandoned factory. It cuts to shots of people putting on balaclavas and gloves, and they slowly appear in shot alongside the band as the video progresses, brandishing signs that read, "No one is illegal," "Trans rights now," "Fight fascism," and "Liberate animals." The comments section on YouTube, whilst predictably very critical of the band's politics and their use of black metal to communicate it, is peppered with an interesting refrain, addressing Dawn Raid's relationship to transgression. One user claims that there's nothing more hardcore than seeing them hold a sign "Fight for trans rights." Another saying that, yes, because the world needs Puritan hall monitor black metal, or this is like what happens when the principal has a band with the music teacher and a cop. I've left the grammatical errors in there deliberately. This is an example of an essentially transgressive critique of Dawn Raid's moral stance, expressed by a conservative audience hostile to the progressive values championed in the video. Black metal, and indeed a lot of metal, has always stood on ambiguous political ground. To issue simple statements in support of refugees or anti-fascist sentiment in almost any other form of modern rock, bar maybe country, would be business as usual as far as I'm concerned, but in the context of black metal it is seen as not only contrary to the norms of genre, but an act of conformism to establishment norms, of aligning with the perceived dominance of woke in the eyes of many black metal fans. This is a microcosm of the tension that emerges whenever the left encroaches on artistic territory traditionally occupied by the right, or the politically chaotic. Radical anarchist black metal attempts to co-opt what it sees as a problematic art form and harness its transgressive power toward egalitarian ends. In the process, it was hoped that this would provide a safe space for potential left-wing millennial recruits reticent to engage with metal for reasons of moral hygiene. Dawn Raid clearly see themselves as championing minority, potentially transgressive causes, but a section of black metal's traditional fandom view this as hall monitor black metal. This is because, despite the fact that metal's historical brand of edgelord vulgarity is now mainstream, it still sees itself as besieged. One of the reasons Trump's brand of conservatism keeps succeeding is its ability to constantly position itself as outside the mainstream, even when holding the highest seats of government. Trans rights and respect for refugees will always be seen as establishment moralizing within this worldview. This gets to the heart of metal's transgression problem. The old enemies that would seek to police what metal can or cannot do are not dead, they just live on in the form of the woke mind virus. Nurgle's frequent run-ins with the Polish Catholic Church are perhaps the only high-profile after-echoes of the traditional battles metal is used to, back when it went toe-to-toe with the PMRC in the 80s. Now, the moralizing enemy is a woke mob who don't want you to have any fun anymore. It should be noted that inverting the values of traditional religious conservatism still carries symbolic value in non-Western metal. I'd speculate that this is one of the reasons why music from, say, South America, Africa, Asia and the Middle East appears more vibrant and self-assured than their European and North American counterparts recently, the latter of which sidestep the problem of transgression by complicating the music into ever more esoteric and largely meaningless permutations of avant-garde, or resorting to, once again, the nostalgia lever. The left's impulse to invert the ideology of problematic music in order to freely play with its forms has been artistically embarrassing and politically disastrous. In attempting to transpose a specific value nexus onto a politically chaotic yet proudly artisanal and often aesthetic subculture, the younger progressive wing of metal has replicated in microcosm the political failures of its generation. In order to repair some of the damage done by this project, it will be necessary to subject transgression within metal to a paradigm shift, one that is already well underway outside of its borders. Hate Meditations is a legacy of the culture wars. My 20s, with all their profound political arousals, forced me to secrete away my love of quote-unquote dangerous art. But by around 2017, I guess I felt the need to reconcile the shifting tectonics in politics and culture with my own aesthetic obsession with extreme metal. I still can't remember if the first essays I published under the blog were ever intended for public consumption or merely a private catharsis. But as I popped the hood on various contentious issues, the evolving document eventually attracted a small brood of readers. Since that time, I've never given much thought to where my writing sits in the hierarchy of thought on metal: graffiti with punctuation, or high-minded guerrilla philosophy. Recently, I have received criticism from some corners for projecting my own bias onto a scene and set of artists, the reality of which bore little relation to what I was actually saying. A lot of this criticism was made in good faith, delivered reasonably by the standards of the internet, and was entirely justified, so naturally I rejected it out of hand, hiding behind the site's tagline that this is indeed armchair rhetoric on extreme metal after all. I idealised a time before the 20th century when intellectuals could just sit in chairs and say things over a brandy, sans women, naturally. But for a period my writing perhaps got a bit carried away with itself, provoking the need to look again at what these critics were actually saying. Being hostile to metal academia and journalism in equal measure, but pulling from both disciplines at different times. Hate Meditations is a series of polemical tracks and love letters to the music I cherish. The one constant has been an attempt to digest the many cultural and social upheavals since the 2010s into a metal context. Reviewing new releases, something I initially promised myself I would never do, actually became useful cardio necessary for carrying out the weight training of meaty essay writing. As a result of this process, my current thinking could crudely be boiled down to three themes. Metal is nostalgic, metal is politically chaotic, and metal inspires a unique work ethic in its participants. The first of these, whilst still an ambient preoccupation across metal's broad church, is something I believe we as a community have now resolved. I took a long view of this in a recent video essay for anyone looking for elaboration on this, but briefly, whilst nostalgia I think defined metal in the 2010s, post-COVID it has been relegated to just another aesthetic category, one among many that artists are free to draw on as they choose. The second concern I covered in another video essay on the evolving politics of metal. My thesis, in brief, was that 20th century metal resisted an explicit politics, being reflexively conservative or chaotic. This allowed it to transgress both societal norms and the values of a broadly left-leaning counterculture. The breakdown of political consensus in the 2010s led metal to reflect broader social trends, namely an older, ostensibly apolitical but broadly conservative demographic that understands politics through the lens of their love of metal, a younger, broadly liberal, middle-class, progressive audience attempting to prize the sonic elements of metal from what they perceive as the genre's toxic legacy, and a third demographic interested in metal's potential for escapism through various permutations of cosplay and fantasy. The behaviour of the young progressive group within metal scenes is an extension of cultural shifts that coincided with the ascent of millennials. This generation embodied the contradiction between a belief in egalitarianism and an instinctive individualism inherited from the 80s, something that led to their widespread policing of culture and the public sphere. At its height in the 2010s, the culling of legacy pop culture figures became an almost weekly ritual, following a clearly plotted cycle. A respected figure from the countercultural pantheon would be accused of something abhorrent or voice an opinion on social media that was distasteful to a certain demographic. This would be followed by a wave of outrage. The individual in question would either equivocate, double down, or unconditionally apologise, each response being unacceptable to a different branch of their audience. Said audience would then embark on a period of reflection, which either ended in a trip to the charity shop with unwanted vinyl, or a slew of lengthy social media posts ruminating on artist separation and the nature of iconoclasm. However deserving individual celebrities were of their condemnation, the idea that fans concern themselves so intensely and rigorously with the personalities and often trivial beliefs of musicians indicated a paradigm shift within alternative culture. These cycles took place in isolation, the debate focusing on the eccentricities of each individual case. But with each repetition, it became clear that cancel culture, although facilitated by social media, was more about a growing discord between fan and artist priorities. Each generation since the 60s has lived in the long shadow of this decade. Millennials, perhaps unknowingly at first, broke with this cycle by calling the values of counterculture itself into question. Transgression itself was now up for debate. Was being rock and roll itself problematic? Many, myself included, were slow to metabolize the implications of this. The first and most obvious of these was the decoupling of politics from politics. Pursuing politics through organizations designed for it, trade unions in the workplace, or political parties themselves. This had already greatly declined by the end of the 20th century. Millennials entering the arena in the early 21st century, the vastness of the internet unfurling before them, found a ready but ultimately impotent outlet for political sentiments that could find no expression through traditional channels. Online spaces fostered these ongoing culture wars. Specific and very often niche concerns dominated the airwaves in both left and right spaces, decoupled from traditional bread and butter politics. Cultural consumption became one of the few levers that gave people a sense of control over the world around them. The flow and moral hygiene of the music people listened to and the films they watched, the source of meticulous scrutiny. The second implication of this is a reappraisal of transgression itself. The tendency to mistake transgression for social liberalism, one of the great legacies of the 60s, was outlined succinctly by Angela Nagle in her welcome intervention Kill All Normies back in 2017. Transgression has been embraced as a virtue within Western social liberalism ever since the 60s. So elevated has the virtue of transgression become in criticisms of art, argued Kieran Cashel, that contemporary art critics have been faced with a challenge: either support transgression unconditionally or condemn the tendency and risk obsolescence amid suspicions of critical conservatism. Alternative culture from the 60s onwards has always been lauded for its transgression of conservative norms. This has led to the imposition of present-day values onto the past where maybe they should never have been applied. For example, participants in boomer-era counterculture were not necessarily always thinking in broadly left or right-wing terms, and they certainly weren't considering their art in light of an exponentially growing set of sensitivities unfurled by a future online left. It also ignores the inherent apoliticism of transgression itself, hence the internal consistency of iconic countercultural figures coming out in support of Trump, perceived as a dramatic rightward pivot by an audience that still sees transgression as inherently left-coded. Marilyn Manson's standing amongst fans is a stark demonstration of this. Lauded as a broadly progressive figure due to the extremity and boldness of his transgressions against a conservative Christian right in the late 1990s.
The two byproducts of that whole tragedy were violence and entertainment and gun control. And how perfect that was the two things that we were going to talk about with the upcoming election. And also then we forgot about Monica Lewinsky, and we forgot about the president was shooting bombs overseas, yet I'm a bad guy because I've sang some rock and roll songs.
Fans are now having to reconcile themselves to the very different legacy this artist may leave behind. The kind of transgression Manson embraced in the 90s is now the preserve of the right. Nagle identifies this shift as the key break between the resurgent online right and an older religious conservatism. The embrace of transgression allowed the right to decouple itself from the moralizing of Christianity. This also robbed transgression of its efficacy as a tool of the left. As Lash understood, for progressive politics, anti-moral transgression has always been a bargain with the devil, because the case for equality is essentially a moral one. Her conclusion that half a century after the Rolling Stones, after Susie Sue and Joy Division flirted with fascist aesthetics, after Piss Christ, after Fight Club, when everyone, from the president's fanboys to McDonald's, are flogging the dead horse of edginess, it may be time to lay the very recent and very modern aesthetic values of counterculture and the entire paradigm to rest and create something new. This is something I saw Slavoj Zizek parrot in a recent interview with Novara Media.
That's why you remember 6th of January, when was it, 5 years ago or whatever, no? When Trump lost. My friends were crying there, no? Because they cried when they saw a crowd of people occupying Congress. They said, but this is what we should be doing. People gather, occupy. Now, the Trumpians even took from us the revolution, Yes, they did. What I would advise the left to drop is this fascination with provocative, subversive acts. There is enough of these obscenities on the right.
He also argues that the cross appeal of someone like Bernie Sanders was in part precisely because he was the opposite of transgression.
And I always, you must know this line of me, like to contrast at this level Trump and Bernie Sanders. Trump appears neocon, American values. Fuck it, in the way he functions. Isn't he the ultimate postmodern relativist, obscene person? The style, how he works, undermines his message. While what I sincerely admire, I'm not without criticism of Bernie Sanders, but what I really admire in him is that as a person, isn't he some kind of I would almost say, decent moral majority, decent, or I like this out of any cheap radical statements, this common sense decency.
Far from instilling a sense of urgency, Trump's second term has led the American left into a long period of reflection, with many calling for a total overhaul in tactics, ideology and culture. To many commentators, what went wrong in the 2010s seems to be about more than strategy or optics, but a fundamentally doomed psychology that poisoned any attempt to build movements. Despite constant calls for collectivism and working together to achieve common goals, leftists demonstrate a unique inability to compromise on any aspect of their personal value system. This is the individualist inheritance of the 80s colliding with a belief in egalitarianism. This instinct has debilitated any attempt to organize a mass movement. For all its bombast, the modern right has no qualms about compromising for the sake of achieving its goals. To give the briefest summary of the autopsies I have read on November 2024, the cause of death is something we've known long before that election. The left has forgotten how to organise. Corbyn and Sanders, for all the panic they provoked within the political and media cartel, were ultimately hastily assembled coalitions that were comprehensively killed off by their better organised opponents within the Democratic and Labour Party establishments. Concurrently, running within the grassroots of these movements was the decoupling of the moral principle of egalitarianism from its means of realisation in capital P politics, a process now referred to as woke. The online right's embrace of transgression, however contradictory, inoculated it against leftist counter-trolling, allowing them to cast the left as a set of moralising prefects, policing behaviour and language, and adopting mental illness as identities, ensuring its total alienation from traditional organised labour. To counteract this, it is argued, the left needs to remember how to organise, abandon its commitment to transgression, including its commitment to identity politics, and embrace a common-sense civic duty that has the potential to appeal beyond the borders of the small minority conversant in the highly bespoke language and mores of the online left dominant throughout the 2010s. In short, the left needs to relearn how to become the mainstream. Whenever I sense a paradigm shift in the air, my first instinct is to ask what it might mean for a practicing metalhead. If transgression is now in the coroner's lab awaiting its cause of death, how are we to understand this within a subculture lauded for its unique ability to transgress, well, everything? In my video on the evolving politics of metal, I dubbed the traditional wing of metal its common sense fandom and described them as generally older and more conservative. Let's call them metal's common sense fandom, easily identifiable by their keep politics out of X mating call, a defense of traditional masculinity insofar as it relates to metal, a celebration of strength and self-reliance, a laissez-faire economic outlook coupled with a deep and passionate attachment to metal as a self-sustaining community, mirroring broader networks of community, charity and volunteer work at a grassroots level, a hostility to new ideas, outside intervention or top-down interference displaying a strong undercurrent of libertarianism. Further, that a high valuation is placed on self-reliance, an emphasis on deep ties to history and community, permanence, hierarchy, strength, a pronounced us and them ethos, born of decades of ridicule and a self-imposed libertarian isolation from the world around it. Baked within metal's apparently radical rejection of societal norms is a pronounced respect for authority and rules, whether this be reverence for a given artist, an agreed canon, the opinions of eminent tastemakers, rigid compositional frameworks, or a ready accommodation of capitalism as an economic model. The aesthetic transgressions it engages with, either through dress codes, artwork, or stage shows, etc., are also subject to a heavily enforced quality control based on internal traditions. Some or all of these values are not anathema to the left. Keith Carr Harris, in his 2007 book Extreme Metal, Music and Culture on the Edge, characterizes extreme metal as transgressive on three fronts: the sonic, the discursive, and the bodily. But underlying this, he also highlights the importance of subcultural capital in metal, whereby participants in the scene gain status through their knowledge of the music and its history, or else engage in fanatical volunteerism, spending hours of free time maintaining networks, writing reviews, and undertaking the monotonous admin of the small business owner in packing CDs or printing zines. This speaks to the unique work ethic of metal. Unique not just because of its intensity, but because the end goal is often unexamined, framed in terms of some vague inherent value metal has for the communities that sustain it, in the clear knowledge that they will receive little to no financial reward. This is the labour of the common sense fandom, the foundation of their pride, and the reason they remain hostile to what they perceive, however mistakenly, as the top-down, gentrifying influence of the progressive wing. See Dawn Raid's trigger-happy prescriptism via the medium of black metal. Here are some examples of this work ethic in action. In the BBC's 2010 documentary, Heavy Metal Britannia, Glenn Tipton, in describing what it was like growing up alongside the steel mills of Birmingham, emphasises his strong motivation to
get out of there,
to work hard at music and overcome his fate in manual labour through his love of metal. In Tales of the Sick, a 2015 documentary on the making of Morbid Angel's Blessed Are the Sick, David Vincent recounts that how he was travelling abroad and he met a fan who came up to him and explained to him that Morbid Angel's music really helped him through school and that he eventually became an attorney at a major law firm. And David Vincent explained that this was the best gift that anyone could give him, was to tell him that somehow his music was able to inspire someone and motivate them and push them to achieve greater things. Recent publications from Decibel Books include detailed accounts of the careers of legendary producer Scott Burns and the death metal band Immolation. Although neither worked together, the common thread between both books is the work ethic of its subjects. Neither Immolation or Burns partook in rock and roll excesses, and both are respected within a certain cohort of fan, and more so within the industry for their commitment to their craft for its own sake, with limited financial reward. This makes the choice to cover both topics in successive publications look like an extended love letter to the value of a strong work ethic, and indeed professionalism, as an important praxis for any aspirational metalhead, or from one of metal's largest publications. Lastly, I recently encountered a classic old-style YouTube rant from a chap called Justin Horville, aka J-Dog, aka The Dog, aka Dead by Dog. Many of you will be familiar with him. He's co-owner of Hell's Headbangers, a large American metal label and online distro. He posts daily videos of himself answering questions sent in by viewers. PayPaling him $10 guarantees he'll answer your question in a video. In this recent clip I encountered, J-Dog makes reference to several comments he has received from people saying they can't come to his festival, Dead by Dog, because they can't afford the ticket and travel. What follows is perhaps the starkest demonstration of the metalhead work ethic I've come across.
I'm fucking a teenager.
Wrong clip.
How are you a grown man and being like, yeah, dude, I just can't make it to that Dead by Dog. It's gonna cost me, I'm in North Carolina, it's gonna cost me about $500. Pocket change? You don't have that? You were talking $500. You are not a man. I am sorry, you are not a fucking man if you can't fucking afford that. Because I was lapping you as a teenager. You fucking teenager, homie. BK Pizza Hut. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, homie. That's how you get it done. You guys just don't have the fucking work ethic. That's all it is. I'm telling you right fucking now, dude. I can guarantee you, every single goddamn one of you that thinks, let's just say, let's round it the fuck up. You think $1,000 is a lot of money. You 100% can guarantee it's because you fucking suck. Because you are where you are. Every job I worked at, I immediately moved up the goddamn ladder. Even at BK, they wanted to make me manager before I was 18. 18 because I was lapping everyone in there. I could do everything better. I could do everything fucking faster. It's your work ethic sucks. And I'll put this litmus test out. Any one of you that thinks $1,000 is a lot of money, I can't make it because it's Dead by Dog because of that. Whatever your job is, for 3 months, fucking 3 months, I would do your job with you at your job, and I guarantee you, whatever it is, I don't give a fuck if you're a goddamn construction worker, I don't give a fuck if you're a goddamn working at Taco Bell, Kohl's, or you're selling women's shoes like Al fucking Bundy. I don't give a fuck what it the fuck is. I guarantee you I will be doing it 10 times better than you. Guarantee you. Just because my mindset and my work ethic, it destroys yours. Change your bitch ass lazy mindset and you'll get so much fucking further. Because again, I did it with Burger King and fucking Pizza Hut, and I was lapping you. I didn't think $1,000 was a lot of money back then. Oh yeah, pocket change. Who don't know that?
So the dog claims that Burger King wanted to make him manager before he was 18, and he claims to have worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week at Burger King to raise hundreds of dollars for spending sprees at metal festivals. Ignoring the implication that Burger King may have violated child labour laws here, what the dog and these other examples have in common is the fact that any financial gain is a mere means of expressing a love of metal. The sacrifice, effort, time and money is given over to an abstract idea that is
metal.
The more money you raise, the more disciplined, the more devoted you are to metal. I read this as a modern after-echo of what German sociologist Max Weber called the Protestant work ethic. Through his study of the Reformation, Weber noted that the psychological implications of these shifting attitudes to salvation with early Protestantism. Under Catholicism, he argued, salvation was all but guaranteed provided one accepted the sacrament, confessed regularly, and respected the authority of the Church. Early Protestantism removed these assurances, engendering an acute anxiety within its practitioners. The most extreme example of this being John Calvin's doctrine of predestination, which taught that nothing was outside the sovereignty of God, including his foreknowledge of your salvation, or indeed damnation. A life of extreme piety was no guarantee that God had not already selected you for damnation long before you were born, and there was no way to influence this outcome through earthly deeds. Whether you were destined for salvation or damnation was predetermined by God, and you could never know in life which side of God's favour you had fallen on. How to live with such acute uncertainty, this became a central concern for Calvinists. It became common to simply bury the doubt, to live as if one already knew that they were one of the chosen. Uncertainty over one's salvation was regarded as a sign of lack of faith. How does one outwardly display belief in their own salvation? One way was worldly success. Glorifying God's kingdom through hard work became a way to demonstrate total confidence that you were one of God's chosen. The idea of a calling, a secular career to be undertaken with extreme zeal and commitment, this was the surest way to work toward the glorification of God. This combined with the fact that wastefulness, luxury and extravagance were all forbidden by the aesthetic teachings of Protestantism. This created the conditions for the accumulation of vast amounts of wealth. This, according to Weber, was the psychological prerequisite of early capitalism in Northern Europe. The various Puritan migrations across the Atlantic exported this ethic to the New World, until we get to the American Revolution some 2 centuries later, where the Founding Fathers are now preaching the virtue of hard work and thriftiness without explicit reference to God, hence the extreme wealth of Protestant North America when compared to the Catholic Southern continent by the end of the 19th century. The jobs J-Dog references, flipping burgers, delivering pizzas, construction work, or indeed his own day job packing orders in the Hell's Headbangers warehouse, they imply a degree of virtuous self-sacrifice through their repetitive manual dimension. Enjoying the job may actually be detrimental to taking pride in the wealth one has amassed through this work ethic. What matters is the struggle, the discipline, the self-control, not any output of the job itself. For J-Dog's Protestant ancestors, the work ethic they developed assured them of salvation. For today's metalhead, the spending money amassed for merch and gig tickets serves the dual function of demonstrating one's self-discipline and their commitment to metal as an abstract ideal. In a sense, this is an austere interpretation of the American dream. The goal is not the accumulation of extreme wealth itself, and certainly not wanton displays of luxury, but the means to support a culture considered inherently valuable. Despite the extremity of his rhetorical style and hyperbolic claims, the dog is expressing a common sentiment in metal that valorizes personal austerity and has no shame in monetization. Indeed, the dog's own scheme of accepting money in exchange for answering questions on his channel all but inculcates an honest hustle into his performance of metalness. He outwardly behaves like one of the saved, one so assured of their metalness that accepting voluntary donations from viewers is enacted as a transparent procedural part of this process. 20th century counterculture was ostensibly a means of imagining alternatives to the dominant ideology. As a result, it was frequently characterized as dropout culture. Metal, given its aesthetic norms of long hair, tattered denim and infrequent bathing, was no exception here. The work ethic outlined above calls into question this stereotype, however. Equally, metal's embrace of apparently mainstream values, hard work pays, for instance, delayed gratification, the virtue of work in and of itself, this calls into question its reflexive transgression of societal norms. I've previously interpreted this work ethic in broadly negative terms. The Dogs rant, whilst extreme, is representative of an obsessive need to raise capital to spend on what is essentially a hobby, or to turn these very hobbies into monetizable assets. And in this sense, metal anticipated a wider shift in counterculture away from countering culture toward the individualized, bespoke, monetized hustle culture encouraged by today's social media apps. Music of both the left and right has readily assimilated this work ethic. When it exists without the incentive of salvation, the metalhead's irrational certainty in the value of metal qua metal, for example, it becomes structurally indistinguishable from naked hustle culture and online scam artistry. Whilst one could read the Dogs' monetizing setup cynically, I honestly doubt he draws in much cash, his passion for the music outside of any financial motive is clear. He works to glorify metal's kingdom on earth, and he's not alone. No one's making real money in music anymore, but a whole lot of people sure are making music, and thinking about it, transacting in it, discussing it, and distributing it. For all the talk of the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, or the collapse of the social contract, evidence abounds of people retaining a strong belief in the value of hard work, if it's for something they believe to have inherent self-creating value, even as the financial incentive disappears over the horizon. It may not be God's kingdom, but people seem to be working for the glorification of something beyond themselves. Is it enough to lift us out of our dark satanic content mills? Ritual, art, poetry, drama, music, dance, philosophy, science, myth, religion are all as essential to man as his daily bread. Man's true life consists not alone in the work activities that directly sustain him, but in the symbolic activities which give significance both to the processes of work and their ultimate products and consummations. On these terms, the 20th century American philosopher of technology, Lewis Mumford, rejected the Marxian idea that what marks humans out is their use of tools. Even in communities dominated by the physical demands of the hunter-gatherer, humans displayed an innate desire to express themselves through physically and mentally demanding trials of dance, music, and ritual. Our minds are too sophisticated for the daily routine alone. They wander, they daydream, speculate. Human expression, the great spectrum of ritual, art, music, storytelling, and religion, all were inseparable and intertwined in the pre-modern mind. Music was not a profession, but an activity embedded within labouring communities. Throughout the medieval period, the church developed the field as a specialism through the evolution of music theory, manuscripts, and canonical works. Outside of this institution, music remained an informal folk practice. The profession of composer was only possible through the patronage of the church. But by the late 1700s, secular patronage began loosening the grip of organised religion on formal music, creating the conditions necessary for the emergence of the rock star. The Romantic movement solidified the idea of the artist as an elite individual, imbuing them with near-divine powers revered by the masses. This gave what was otherwise a rather transactional relationship between a composer, their patron, and a wealthy audience a much-needed spiritualism. Folk culture became low culture, simplistic, base, vulgar. The barrier between art and audience was renewed as the 20th century ushered in an era of mass consumption. Artists and entertainers were professionals producing products with a clear market value, their talent and skill beyond anything the rest of us could hope to aspire to. Art became segregated off from the masses, an exclusive field requiring unique abilities to enter. Ordinary people did not practice the arts, they had hobbies. More recently, home recording technology and ready distribution via social media has begun to degrade these strict distinctions. The high ratio of creatives to audience, especially in metal, calls into question the boundary between an artist practicing their arts and an audience metabolizing their work. Is it too much of a stretch to read this shift as a return to a historical norm, the resurgence of folk arts as a democratic, accessible, mass participatory practice? There are obvious problems with this speculation. Aside from the clear technological differences, today's digital hobbyists are not pulling on the inheritance of generational folkways, instead reconfiguring 20th century genres developed in a top-down environment. Equally, although there is an undeniable communal element at play in digital folk culture, the collaborative features of TikTok, for instance, or the latent social elements of social media, the spontaneous formation of disparate online communities, but the infrastructure through which it is distributed is designed to be transactional. The quantitative reward systems of social media can quickly distort our relationship to even the most benign hobby. In another video essay, I outline the petty bourgeois work ethic of metal, arguing that We could say of post-digital metal then, that we as metalheads are all small business owners now. Even for those of us in gainful, real-world employment, for want of a better term, there is no space for us to slack off. If our hobby is metal, it will be mediated through social media, which demands of us that we build and maintain a brand. Here we see the cynical side of modern folk culture, which amounts to little more than building a personal brand, motivated by a desire for clout and the convoluted web of digital financial incentives. Folk content is usually tailored to what people believe will best drive engagement and foster revenue streams. But the very choice to turn a hobby into something functionally indistinguishable from work demonstrates a belief in its inherent value. It evinces a sense of duty to metal in the abstract over and above personal status. J-Dog's tough love advice is him enacting this duty, encouraging people to raise capital through menial work in order to express their love of metal. If you love metal, show me. Go out and work so you can afford that gig ticket, the travel, the accommodation, money for merch. If you can't or won't, you haven't acquired a right to metal by suitably honouring it through self-discipline. Dropout culture is one of the many transgressions counterculture, including metal for a time, enacts toward traditional conservative values, the rejection of work, routine, formality, the acquisition of wealth, indeed of the Protestant work ethic that formed a huge part of post-war American exceptionalism. A rejection of all this was baked into the various countercultural waves of the 60s, 70s and 80s. But metal's common sense fandom, being the older demographic that established most of metal's social norms, had long ago inculcated a mainstream work ethic. Whatever transgressive values metal embodied in the abstract, musical or aesthetic sense, hard work has remained the ambient virtue most respected within the day-to-day running of the scene. Equally, scrounger culture, those taking advantage of the scene, not running their business within it professionally enough, a label, recording studio, a gig venue and so on. This attracts the deepest ire. Even those running endeavours entirely off their own back where no financial transactions are taking place, they are expected to show up, as it were, and act with a degree of professionalism, thus outwardly demonstrating their commitment to the metal cause. From this angle, the arrival of the younger progressive wing could be read as an unconscious attempt to push metal back to the old-school dropout culture. Implicit in the progressive instincts of younger fans is a suspicion of conservative institutions and values. Police, family, school, the 9 to 5, the Western canon, all have come under scrutiny in progressive discourse. The valorization of work has also been questioned in progressive quarters. If nothing else, it's boring for young graduates looking to apply their newly acquired critical theory to live cultural situations. Despite this willingness to question the value of work in the abstract, in practice the progressive wing has internalized the hustle and grind ethics just as readily as their common sense counterparts. The maintenance of a small online business with all the tedious admin that accompanies it, from email correspondence to video editing, comment moderation, driving engagement by any means necessary, all comes just as naturally to the left as much as it does the right in metal. It's tempting, and it's a temptation I've long indulged, to be viscerally negative about this. The breakdown of mainstream culture means counterculture no longer has anything to counter, and even if it did, it appears incapable of doing so. Alternative culture has mutated into a set of highly bespoke, overworked, over-aware expressions that, whilst intellectually curious, have no resonance beyond the immediate circumstances of their creation. Equally, counterculture is no longer capable of living the changes it wishes to see in the world, as it were, instead engaging in the same rat race within the dark satanic content mills, inculcating the values and logic of small business ownership instead of any imaginative rebuttal of establishment norms. But if we take Nagel and Zizek's argument seriously, that transgression has had its day and the time is nigh for a new, simple, common-sense morality, rebutting establishment norms is perhaps a red herring. We should instead be looking for nodes of commonality, a work ethic based on an act of faith, that metal has self-creating value, for example. This seems to fit the bill. This is perhaps hard to understand for those unaccustomed to the passion and dedication metal provokes in its fan base. The abstract idea that is metal, driving people to work menial jobs or give over hours of their free time to maintain their band, label, blog, festival or magazine, most of which has no value outside of metal's borders. This looks every bit as irrational as the salvationist anxiety of Calvin's followers. But to dismiss something as irrational is not the same as explaining it. It exists, and it has the strength to motivate people into dedicating years of their life to it. That could be enough. I remain deeply suspicious of metal studies as an academic discipline. Whilst I can see the value of an interdisciplinary collection of academics studying metal, the specialist field of metal studies developed by places like the International Society for Metal Music Studies has led to an overproduction of theory, in my view, in what is a relatively limited pocket of culture. I take it to be symptomatic of a wider malaise, maybe a surplus of humanities students leading to the over-theorization of the subcultures they participated in at university. The result has been a growing detachment of theory from any reality on the ground, the pressure to produce unique takes that intersect on specific areas of subculture and niche academic frameworks divorces academia from its efficacy. This also leads to the relentless compartmentalization of metal. Its problematic elements are to be acknowledged and studied, but the constant need to apologize for or condemn them prevents serious study of their behaviors and norms. At best, academics play the role of apologists to the establishment, cleaning metal off, making it presentable to some imagined set of institutional standards, framing its rougher edges in terms that mainstream society may understand or in some sense forgive. At worst, they break rank and engage in outright attacks on metal, usually from a progressive perspective for the sake of academic clout. Attacks that rarely do justice to the messy reality of power struggles and proxy wars within the scene itself, and in many points of unity across its demographics. It all serves little constructive purpose. That academics are incentivized to find a niche encourages projection and top-down thinking. Metal becomes little more than a plaything for the expression of whatever obscure point of critical theory the writer wishes to expand upon. This is the same accusation that was levelled at me. My chief motivation for re-examining metal from a universalist perspective is to counterbalance some of this. Respect for the value of metal qua metal, its perpetuation through hours of unpaid labour committed by its disciples. This exists. It's an observable phenomenon, not some minor curiosity of critical theory. This makes it uniquely leverageable in the ongoing struggle for universalism. This value, philosophically bland, aesthetically dull, this is one of the few vectors over which the left and the right, or the apolitically chaotic for that matter, they could all potentially find common ground.
Thanks for listening. If you like what I do here, consider subscribing to my Substack. Subscribers get access to paid articles, ad-free access to all the video essays like this one, and ad-free access to the podcasts. You all get it, new content delivered directly to your mail hole. So consider signing up or do it for free.